A lot of teams buy document AI features before they decide where the real business logic belongs. That mistake gets expensive fast, because strong enterprise IDP is not just a cloud service call. It is architecture, workflow, validation, review, and operational control. Azure AI Document Intelligence fits best at the extraction layer. That means OCR, layout recognition, table detection, key value extraction, and specialized document reading where the service clearly adds value. In a Microsoft-Centric environment, this is often the fastest way to get strong reading capability without building low-level extraction logic yourself. But that does not mean Azure should own the entire workflow. That is the mistake many teams make. They see a strong extraction result and assume the service should also dictate business logic, workflow control, and downstream processing. In most enterprise systems, that is too much responsibility for one layer. A stronger pattern is to treat Azure AI Document Intelligence like a capable service boundary. The application submits content, receives results, preserves the evidence, and then hands those results to the rest of the enterprise pipeline. That is where business-specific logic takes over. A receipt processing workflow may need one set of validations, a claims workflow may need another, a licensing workflow may need something else entirely. Those differences usually belong in application logic, not inside a generic extraction service. A practical example would be an organization processing onboarding forms, invoices, and support documents. Azure can read the documents well, but the surrounding workflow still has to decide which process type the submission belongs to, which fields are mandatory, which values must be verified against known systems, and when a human needs to step in. That is not just extraction, that is enterprise behavior. So the clean architectural rule is this: use Azure where Azure is strongest, document reading and structured extraction, but do not confuse that with owning the whole application. That approach gives you flexibility too. If you later change extraction settings, add other providers, or adjust job types, the rest of the system does not have to collapse around one service decision. That is a much better enterprise position. Power Automate and Logic apps fit best where the workflow is event-driven, integration-heavy, and not excessively complex in its core decision logic. They are useful for orchestration, notifications, simple routing, approvals, and connecting existing Microsoft systems without requiring everything to be custom code. That makes them valuable in IDP, but only in the right places. A weak design tries to put the entire workflow into low-code orchestration. A stronger design uses these tools around the edges of the system where their strengths are clear. For example, they can trigger a process when a file lands in SharePoint, send notifications when review is complete, push a result into a downstream system, or start a business process after structured output has been validated. Where teams get into trouble is when they overload these tools with logic that should really live in a more controlled application layer. Complex field-level validation, multi-step exception handling, heavy business rules, deep enrichment, workload management, and high-volume processing coordination can become difficult to maintain when expressed primarily as workflow canvas logic. That is especially true when multiple departments, multiple document families, or multiple failure paths are involved. A practical recommendation is to ask a simple question: is this primarily orchestration, or is it core business logic? If it is orchestration, Power Automate or Logic apps may be a very good fit. If it is core business logic with many branching conditions, retries, validations, and support expectations, that usually belongs in C# and .NET. That boundary keeps the system easier to reason about. Use workflow tools to connect and coordinate. Use application code to decide and control. That gives you the best of both worlds. You keep Microsoft native integration advantages without turning the core of your IDP system into a hard-to-debug tangle of visual workflows. This is where I think many teams make their most expensive architectural mistake. They underestimate how much value SQL Server and custom C# and .NET still bring to enterprise IDP. SQL Server is not just an old familiar database in this conversation. It can act as a control plane, a system of record, an audit store, a workflow state tracker, and a source of validation and enrichment data. That matters because IDP is not simply about receiving extracted fields. It is about controlling jobs, storing statuses, preserving evidence, tracking retries, recording review outcomes, and supporting downstream integration in a way enterprise teams can understand and operate. Custom C# and .NET matter for a similar reason. They are often the right place for business rules, metadata verification, confidence handling, routing logic, enrichment calls, exception categorization, and typed output contracts. Those responsibilities require determinism, debuggability, version control, testing, observability, and maintainability. That is exactly where conventional enterprise software engineering shines. Consider a scenario where one workflow processes short receipts and another processes long, mixed-format compliance records. If both are forced through the same generic document AI configuration, costs rise and control drops. A stronger approach uses custom application logic to separate job types, assign workload tiers, apply different validations, and route different exceptions. SQL Server tracks the lifecycle. .NET enforces the rules. Azure handles extraction where appropriate. That is a much more disciplined architecture. This is the key point. Strong IDP is usually hybrid by design. Teams overpay when they push too much into premium document services and underuse conventional enterprise code for the parts it handles well. In Microsoft-Centric environments, that is a mistake because the organization often already has the skills, tools, and operating patterns to implement these responsibilities in .NET and SQL Server effectively. Human review is one of the most important parts of production IDP, and Microsoft-centric organizations have several practical ways to implement it. The right choice depends on the existing environment, the complexity of the review process, and how tightly the review experience must integrate with other enterprise systems. For some teams, a Blazor application is a strong fit. It gives you a custom interface, strong control over workflow behavior, and a good way to present extracted fields, confidence indicators, source evidence, and validation failures in one place. That is especially useful when the review process is central to the system and needs more than a simple task form. For other teams, Power Apps may be appropriate if the review experience is relatively structured and fits well within existing low-code patterns. And in some environments, the best answer is not to build a separate reviewer application at all. If an organization already has an internal system where staff live all day, it may make more sense to embed the review step there and expose the IDP results through an agreed contract or API. A weak review design makes the user do detective work. A stronger review design focuses the reviewer's attention. Show the document. Show the field candidates. Show the confidence. Show the failed validations. Show the relevant metadata. Let the reviewer correct or confirm the values quickly. Then write the outcome back cleanly so the audit trail remains intact. A practical decision rule is this: if the review process is strategically important or operationally complex, give it a first-class interface. If it is lighter weight and tightly tied to an existing platform, integrate it where people already work. What matters most is not the framework choice by itself. What matters is speed, clarity, and control. Human review is not a side screen. In many IDP systems, it is one of the core operational surfaces. So choose the technology that supports that reality, not just the one that is easiest to start with. Enterprise IDP is one of those projects that can look like a simple application effort from the outside, but that is rarely the full picture. If the project is real, then infrastructure, security, DevOps, and legal all have a role in making it deployable, supportable, and acceptable inside the organization. Infrastructure teams care about where the workloads run, how they scale, what dependencies they introduce, and how they recover when systems fail. DevOps cares about deployment patterns, version control, monitoring, alerting, rollback, and operational visibility. Security cares about access control, encryption, secrets management, region boundaries, and whether the data is being handled safely. Legal and compliance teams may care about retention, auditability, who can review specific content, and whether the system fits industry or public sector obligations. Ignoring those groups early usually slows the project down later. A weak team treats those roles like downstream approval gates. A stronger team brings them in while architecture is still forming. That changes design choices in healthy ways. Maybe certain workloads need stronger isolation. Maybe some review actions need better audit logging. Maybe some outputs need retention controls. Maybe deployment needs to align with existing enterprise release practices. Those are not annoying details. They are part of what makes the solution real. A practical framework is to ask 4 operational questions early. How will this be deployed? How will this be monitored? How will access be controlled? How will the system explain its actions later? If the team cannot answer those questions, the implementation is still immature. That is why successful IDP is not just a development exercise. It is cross-functional enterprise delivery. And in Microsoft-centric organizations, that usually works best when the architecture matches patterns the broader support organization already understands. The best first IDP project is usually not the most glamorous one. It is the one that gives the organization a credible, measurable win without forcing the team to solve every hard case in the first iteration. A good first project usually has 5 characteristics. First, it has meaningful volume. If the workflow is too rare, the payoff will be hard to see. Second, it has measurable manual effort or measurable delay. Third, the document family is structured enough to make progress realistic. Fourth, the downstream business value is clear. And fifth, the project can tolerate a reasonable human review path while the system matures. That combination tends to produce useful early wins. Examples include receipts, invoices, onboarding forms, structured claims intake, certifications, or support documentation where the organization already knows the business process and feels the operational pain. These are strong first projects because they connect document extraction to visible workflow improvement. A weak selection process starts with the flashiest use case or the hardest document family because it sounds impressive. A stronger selection process starts with a workflow where cost, delay, and manual effort are obvious, and where the enterprise can see the result quickly. That creates credibility for the next phases. One practical recommendation is to evaluate candidate projects against a simple scorecard. Volume, manual effort, document consistency, business risk, validation, complexity, integration, complexity, expected payoff. That scorecard helps teams avoid jumping into a use case that is technically possible but operationally premature. The first IDP win should make the organization smarter, not just busier. If the first project proves that document-heavy work can become structured, validated, auditable, and workflow-ready in a Microsoft-centric environment, then the organization has a foundation it can reuse and extend. That is exactly what a first project should do. Microsoft-centric enterprise IDP works best when each technology plays the right role. Azure for extraction, workflow tools for orchestration, .NET and SQL Server for control, validation, and integration, and human review where uncertainty still matters. Done right, that becomes a practical, scalable foundation for applied AI. Explore more at ain.net.com. Thanks for watching.